Where's that?
We never explored that. That's true. Amongst all of the things that we haven't explored.
Oh, wow.
See, we were talking
What
about
have we explored?
We're talking about names this morning. Where they come
My
from.
mother's people is named Tonkin.
Ginger means
I find this
ginger.
a Turkic.
Ginger spice.
Turkic
Come on.
name.
Yeah.
It even sounds the way it looks, spells the way
Sounds and it's Kishmo Kenu, as they say.
Is that, what language is it? What language is it, Jack?
It's Yiddish and German. Shalom Aleichem. Okay, let's get this. Get it on tight. All right. Okay, let's see. Let's see. Let's get this straight. All right. Good morning, everybody. Hi.
Hi.
I'm not sure if they can. All right. Let's learn together. It's a late morning. Everybody here was. You guys are on time, but I woke up a little bit later. We had a good dinner at Mark Schiller's house last night. I was alone because my family's up in New Rochelle the Shabbos. We're going to be away for a large part of July, and I'm going to be in Israel. So it was a long night. So I'm happy to be here. But then Victor, we're all starting a little bit late. So sorry to Gil in Israel, who's already not late, but like 7 hours ahead of us, and to the Chaver that are waiting. So we'll be having sheets to put down on the table in a minute. But let's start with the Birchot Torah. Is that okay, Gil? Toda rabah. Okay, here we go. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'asot divrei Torah. Amen. All right, I'll bring it up on the screen. We'll learn a little bit in the screen, and then we'll go to. Gil, I can't see where I can share. Can I share? Is it enabled for me to share?
Should be. Give me a second.
I got it. All right. We're a long way away from Kansas, friends. I remember when we started Open Book, we didn't have any sheets. We just opened up, we opened up a Chumash. We went through the Chumash. Here we go. We have to check off 15 boxes before we can start. Okay. All right. We're going to look at chapter 15, verses 27 through 41 today. It's not the most obvious thing that you would want to learn in Parshat Shlach, but we've learned all of the obvious things in Parshat Shlach many times. I'd like to learn a little bit less obvious, a little bit more challenging in terms of its meaning-making capacity. It's almost like a test of our capacity to do midrash, to unfold the Torah at a level that we want, in order to absorb it, or at least look for what's nutritious in the Torah. It's not easy. Sometimes there's stuff in Torah that's immediately digestible, and you think, oh, that tastes good, it's good for me, it's all those things. And sometimes there's something you think it's not really sure exactly what this is doing here in terms of my own spiritual nutritional value. And sometimes you have to work a little bit harder to make it digestible, and then maybe even taste great. So let's look at source number one and start off the journey here. And part of the story of these of what I really want to focus on, it has to do with where it lands in the Torah, and where it is in more broadly in the parsha. So we begin at the end of a series of psukim, of verses that have to do with sin, and with one makes a vow and doesn't fulfill his vow and so on. And then the Torah comes to these verses, chapter 15, verses 27 through 32. In the case of an individual who has sinned unwittingly, the word here is bishgaga. Shogeg here means something that's unwitting, right? This is the Hebrew word, bishgaga. Shin gimel gimel. And the Torah tells us what you have to do. I mean, and again, we can imagine ourselves like, oh, sinning unintentionally. But yeah, like you can imagine somebody does something harmful to another person unintentionally. They know that it was, they ate matzah on Pesach. God forbid, you didn't know it was Pesach, Or you didn't, Shabbos, in the time of the Torah, you did something and you're like, oh, whoops, I didn't know. We can all imagine things like that, Oh, is that a cheeseburger? I didn't realize, All right, using all kinds of, obvious cases. But let's say in that period you did something and you didn't know that it was quote unquote a sin, or you did it accidentally. So then you would bring hikriva ez bat shnata lechatat. You would bring a year-old she-goat. And the Kohen, the priest, v'chiper Kohen, we're in verse 28 here. The priest shall make expiation. V'chiper Kohen al nefesh. Hashogeget b'cheta v'shgaga l'fnei Adonai lechaper alav v'nislach lo. So the priest will do what, will bring the offering, and God will forgive you, right? And you'll be forgiven. Verse 29. This goes not just for Jews, but ha'ezrach b'nei Israel v'lager gar b'tocham. So this is for someone who is living amongst you as a resident alien, or someone who is a convert, either way, a stranger or resident alien, doesn't matter. Those are the categories. Torah achas. There's one Torah, right, or one law. Yelachem le'oseh b'shgaga. There's no difference between a Jew and non-Jew, anybody who lived at that time. You were an Israelite, non-Israelite. If you sinned unwittingly against the law of the land, you had to bring a shgaga. You had to bring you had to offer this kind of offering. V'nefesh, and now the Torah says, verse 30, it shifts gears. Yeah, are you guys with me? Verse 30, big enough? Right? And actually, I don't know why 32 is there. Anyway, v'nefesh asher taseh b'yad ramah. But the soul that will do something with a yad ramah. What's a yad ramah? A hand that is ramah, a lifted hand. It appears only one other time in the Torah. It appears when the Israelites leave Egypt. Yad ramah. Yad ramah. They have an uplifted hand, like Romemu, like it's elevated. Mm-hmm. What does it mean? What does it mean to have an elevated hand here in its context? It means to be defiant, right? Azoi. I put the fist in there, but it could just be like this. But Yad Ramah could be this, but it could also be, right? No, it's like the way it starts. Davka. We used to my father Davka. You're a Davkanik. I'm not. Screw you. Like you can almost imagine we have a defiant hand. It could be almost like a middle finger to heaven. You know what I'm saying? It's like right? Azoi, and then there says mina ezrach or mina ger. It doesn't matter if it's an ezrach or a ger. It doesn't matter if it's a Jew or non-Jew, resident alien. In other words, same categories. Es Hashem hu megadef. The person has blasphemed God, right? The word megadef together. And this soul should be cut off from amongst the people. Because he is essentially despised God's word and God's law. That mitzvotav hefer. He says, this person shall be cut off, cut off with the sin within them. In other words, the sin is still within them and they've been cut off from the people. All right, that's the end of section number 1. Now, you'll see I appended the next verse because it's right there, but let's go to section 2 because it's a different story, but you can see it flows into the next story. And this is the story that I want to talk about, but it's kind of wild just to think about where it took place. And then the Torah changes gears, it seems, and it says narratively, because that was just law, right? It was giving us law didactically, telling us about various sins. And now, story time. Ayub and Israel b'midbar, and the children of Israel were in the desert. Vayimtzeu ish mikoshesh eitzim b'yom haShabbat. And the people were in the desert, and they found a man gathering sticks or wood. Kindling wood, really, b'yom haShabbat, on the day of Shabbat. Vayakrivu oso motzim oso mikoshesh eitzim el Moshe. Right, so they brought him close, the ones who found that one who was gathering sticks, and they brought him to Moshe and to Aaron and to the entire people, the El Kol Ha'edah, the whole Edah. Vayinichu oto b'mishmar. And the Torah doesn't say what happens when they brought him to Moshe. There's no dialogue here, which we would have loved to have heard, right? It would have been great to have heard, something here from Moshe, but they brought him to Moshe and to Aaron, and the next moment they're placing him into a mishmar. What's a mishmar? They place him into like the guard tower, under watch. Kilo parash mayasalo, because it wasn't clear what to do with him. And then, again, definitely not God's best moment from our perspective. Many of us are Moshe moti mata ish, let the person die. Ragom oto ba'avanim, let him be stoned to death with stones.
Is it really say that?
Yeah.
Oh
Says it really.
God.
Why? What's so shocking? It's a Bronze Age text. Every time people get shocked by this, I'm like, it's a Bronze Age text. It's okay. Okay. All of the people outside of the camp, let him be stoned to death.
Throw it out.
Right?
Yes.
Throw it out of the Torah.
No, God forbid. God forbid. Let it be in the Torah. and they take him out of all the people that take him out of all the people take him out of the camp. And they stone him to death. And Vayamos, and he dies kasher tzivah Adonai es Moshe, as God is, and he dies as God has commanded Moshe. Full stop. Okay? Take it in for a second. Take it in for a moment. Okay. So then the next moment is Vayom Adonai Moshe. The very next moment, Vayom Adonai Moshe le'mor. This is something that a lot of us are familiar with from the liturgy. It's in the Siddur. Right? God says to say to them, make tzitzit al kavev dehem on the corners of the garments for all generations. Let them place tzitzis. Let the corner be a string of blue thread of yarn thread that is twisted purple. Let it be for you the tzitzit for whatever that is. And seeing it, you will remember God's mitzvot, and you'll do them, and you will not be led astray by your hearts and then by your eyes that you are prostituting yourselves for. There, that you might remember that Lamandis Geru. We know this from the Shema, right? Lamandis Geru, that you might remember and do all the mitzvot that God has given you, and be holy to God. I am the Lord your God. I am Yudhevaveh, your power, who took you out of the land of Egypt and takes you out of the land of Egypt in order to be a God for you. I am Yudhevaveh, your God. These verses 27 through 41, do not have any breaks in them. Actually, they have some breaks in the Torah, but they're not placed in the order in this way with source 1, 2, and 3. So let's go back. What exactly is happening in the story of the Mekoshe Sheitzim? What's going on with the story of the Mekoshe Sheitzim? Let's look at this clearly, and then I also want to come back to what's the connection between the source number 1, source 3, and why in between these two sources of the one who does something brazenly and the one who does and who wears tzitziot, we have the story of this Mekoshe Sheitzim, and what in the story of this gatherer of the wood is redeemable. I know that we know what's not redeemable, the punishment. But let's look, I want to look at something before the punishment. I want to see if maybe there's something more expressly redeemable from the story. So let's go deeper into the story. Source number 2 again. Vayu b'nei Yisrael b'midbar. The children of Israel were in the midbar. Vayimtzu ish Mekoshe Sheitzim yom HaShabbat, and they discovered a man gathering wood on Shabbat. What's funny about this verse? To you?
Severe Gerura.
Severe Gurur, the whole thing is Gevurah. But what's funny about the verse, this particular verse, what's interesting to you?
Where are there trees in the desert?
Okay, where are the trees in the desert? For a good question, a general question about where they get things.
Midbar is not exactly desert, it's wilderness.
It's wilderness, but we know that wilderness, it doesn't have trees in it, but we know that it's kind of lacking forestation. Okay, they brought trees with them, maybe, I don't know, that there's a lot of, that's a good question. That's a realistic question. I'm asking something a little bit more, I don't know, that is a good question. What else is interesting? Who's the man?
First of all, 32 is a verse of lead, of heart.
Yeah.
So why would heart be with this kind of?
Well, I'm going to assume that the Christians put in the numbers on the verses, so that's it's a much later. Yeah, the Christian redactors of the Bible put in the verse numbers. So that's. Although I always love where it still goes with the gematria, but in this case, there are no verse numbers in the Torah. It's just there's just paragraph breaks, but no number of verses. Although we do know where verses begin and end, and so it made sense for them. Like it makes sense. This is the 32nd verse. It's true, according to the way that the rabbis, not the Masoretes who kind of gave the musical cantillation and said here stop there. But usually, okay, great. So I want to go to Thomas. So Thomas says, "Who's the man?" Right? Who's the man? And what was the second thing you said?
Where's he from?
Where is he from? Who's the man? Who is this guy? It's not the first time Torah has an unidentified person, right? We have a number of places. The first one probably is the one with Joseph's story, where Joseph sees a man on his way down to find the brothers. There's a number of ish, but they don't say the guy's name, which by the way becomes in the midrash. This becomes important because he's sinning, and somebody in the midrash named Rabbi Akiva. So remember Rabbi Akiva?
Yes.
Yeah, famous rabbi, very important rabbi. He actually named him. He said that it was Tzlofchad, the daughters of Tzlofchad.
Right.
This is Tzlofchad, according to Rabbi Akiva, this is Tzlofchad. And you know what happened after he said what it was? In the Midrash, you know what happens after he says it? The Midrash quotes him in a dialogue with another rabbi. The other rabbi says, Akiva, what are you doing? What God concealed, you revealed. Why should we know who this person is? God didn't want us to know who this person is, and if he sinned, why should we know? You're embarrassing him.
Yeah.
That's the rabbi said, Akiva. He said, it's not bad enough that he lost his share in this world, you have to also take it away from the world. Like now, for generations, people have to know who he is. God said, you don't have to know who this guy is. Like, we want to keep his identity, we don't have to cancel him, So let's just back to Thomas's question. Who is this guy? Number one. Number two, what
did Rabbi Akiva respond to?
He didn't respond.
He did.
It was like, nice. What's another strange theory? Yeah, Elliot?
When did this happen? It says once.
Yeah. Right, it was that they were in the desert. When in the desert? Like, they were in the desert for a long time, right? Is it at this moment? Is it chronological, or is it an earlier moment in the Torah? And that matters because it matters. Like, did they know? Like, in other words, like when this happens matters because when did the Israelites know that certain things were not permitted or were prohibited on Shabbat? Like, if it happens here, then it makes sense that he is this person an accidental violator of Shabbat, or is he a defiant violator of Shabbat? Right? Let's ask another question. What about the word vayimtzeu? They found him. What do you mean they found him? He was vayimtzeu. They found the guy. It should have. Tell me at least two other verbs they could have used.
Encountered.
They encountered somebody.
They saw him.
They saw him. Like, they found it. Like, what do you mean they found him?
Like a
And then
patrol.
it repeats himself, like as if they were waiting to find something. In other words,
It's like a patrol.
Almost like
a
they're
patrol.
looking for-
So let's look at what Nikki says. Let's look at sources on the word vayimtzeu. So the Chizkuni says, right? You see the source number 9 says, just like Nikki said. Why does the Torah tell us that they found him? This teaches us that Moses must have appointed men, especially appointed to look for lawbreakers. Now, I think you could also make a case that poetically it also, like, they happened upon him, right? He was doing it privately. He didn't want anybody to see him. There are a lot of ways to look for it. Vayimtzeu could also be that they just happened to find him, right? It tells us that it was kind of it was an accident that they even found him, or more intentionally they were looking for him. So let's go back to the sources. Let's look at what happens. So we have these questions, good questions. Let's look at the second verse. And they brought him, pronouns, they brought him, hamotzim oto mikoshesh eitzim. Like, it's just a strange verse. They brought him, it should have said, vayakrivu hamotzim oto, like, vayakrivu hamotzim et, oto el Moshe. Why does it oto mikoshesh, that gather of sticks? It's just a strange locution. Like, they brought they brought him, the founders, the finders, that certain mikoshesh eitzim, that particular gather of sticks, okay, to Moses, Aaron, and the whole people. Why? To Moses, to Aaron, and all of the people. Like, and the whole Edah, it's the same word used in the Meraglim story. Like, we're in the story of the spies in this parsha, and God had said, how long would this really evil Edah? The word Edah is, and there are many words in the Bible for congregation. Kahal, it could be all of an Israel. Here it's the word Edah, E-I-D-A-H, Ayin Dalet Hey, Edah, and it happens to be a particular word that's used in this parsha to denote the 10 people who spoke ill about the land of Israel, and also about the whole group. Right, all of the whole group that had gathered around to say, well, we're not going, so they bring this guy over here, right, to the whole group, to the whole community. And then there's an ellipsis between verses 34 and verse 35 is essentially, first of all, we have an ellipsis because we don't know what was said, right? There's no verbal, as I said in the first time around, they didn't say, it doesn't say what Moshe says out loud, but clearly from the verse, Moshe must have told them to put him into the mishmar. We don't know what a mishmar is. We don't have any, where do we know that there is a mishmar? What's a mishmar? Like some holding dock. I guess, what would be the English term for
Holding cell.
Like a holding cell. They put him in a holding cell, and they guard him, right? And then the Torah adds this. These are these great words. I think these words are the great words. Kilo porash mayaselo. They didn't know what should be done with them. It wasn't clear. Lo porash. What is the word porash? Parsha. Parshanut.
Portion.
A portion. But that's true. In the Torah it's called a portion of the parsha. But the people who come and do commentary on the Torah are called parshanim. What's parshanut is
To take something out.
lefaresh is prisha is to separate something. Parush, to analyze. It's to analyze or to comment. It's to interpret. Parshanim are commentaries. It wasn't clear to them like how to read the situation. They didn't know how to read this. And so it tells us that they left him there. By Anichu also, they left him there. And then of course we have the verdict, which we can for a moment bracket. For a moment. Let's look at something interesting. The Midrash, of course, is always making hay out of things that we don't know. Now look at this Midrash much later on, and I didn't have time to read it to translate it into English, so let me just read it to you, okay? It's here, okay? Source number 4. Lama nismecha parsha mekoshesh eitzim leparsha tzitzit. Now the Midrash goes in the other direction, not from why is this connected to the one who blasphemes in a brazen way, but why is it connected to the portion that comes right after, which is about tzitzit. In other words, why is it sandwiched before tzitzit? So listen to this conversation that the Midrash imagines happens between God and Moses. Like, in other words, remember it said I didn't know, like what did Moshe say? It's not clear what Moshe says. It doesn't say anything about what Moshe might have said when they brought it to him. Listen to what Moshe says in the Midrashic mind. God comes to B'shah Shamar Hakadosh Baruch Hu Mekoshesh Chayav Mitah. So when God comes to the Mikoshet and says, you know what, this person has to be, is guilty and deserves the capital punishment. Amar Moshe Lifnei Kadosh Baruch Hu. Moses says to God, Master of the world, Ein lo pesha b'davar zeh. He didn't have any sin in this. Shema hayad v'da'ato shelo yishkach et ha-Shabbat v'lishmor mitzvot shehu yom ha-Shabbat ve'eino noseh tefillin alav. He says, listen, maybe he forgot. Yeah, maybe he's really not the category of the brazen one. Maybe he's in the category of the person who made it, who accidentally, he forgot that it was Shabbat, right? He forgot that it was Shabbat, and he didn't know, right? He didn't know. He's not carrying tefillin. He's like, he didn't know that he doesn't know. Like maybe he forgot. And then God says, no, they already warned him. God goes into his own, story, right? So in the Midrash, the reason why it says Vayimtza, that they found him, is that that's a clue that they didn't just find him. They found him guilty. Like, to find somebody guilty, they found him, meaning that they warned him. Like, the Midrash makes a lot about the word to find, because it's strange. It says, no, what's really going on here, what it means that they found him is that they were standing there and they said, don't do it. If you do it, you're going to be in trouble. Don't do it. And he said, no, I'm doing it anyway. Right? Anyway, I'm not going to go into the whole tefillin part here. It's a weird thing. But in other words, there's an opinion in that the reason why it says it's connected to tzitziot is because it's right there. Because God was saying to Moshe, like, you should be defended. He was warned. In other words, the tzitziot were a reminder, and Moses said he didn't know, and then God said, what do you mean he didn't know? Like, the people were there as a reminder, the way the tzitziot are going to be a reminder in the future, and he did it anyway. He was brazen. In other words, God said, trust me, he was brazen. But what's important for us here, and our purposes here, is that the Midrash is already struggling with the things that we're struggling with, which is, what's going on here? Like, is it an accident? Why is he being punished? What really happened? The story is so sparse. It looks cruel from our perspective. Like, and the Midrash is already beginning to put language into Moshe as a defender of the Jewish people to say, what is this here? This doesn't make any sense. It doesn't seem like this person is a brazen individual. Now, God seems to be saying, no, you don't understand. The reason why it's coming after the Yad Ramah, the verses of haughty or brazen and arrogant defiance, is that this person was a defiant person. Now, it's not at all true that that's everyone's opinion. There are some people who say something remarkable. Look at this next source. Oh, I'm sorry. Source 5 is not The source 5 here is a paraphrasing of the source that I said out loud about Moses and that other rabbi, where if you look at source 5, it says mi haya zeh haya tzavcha ben chefer. So v'yesh omrim ki mishu amar shehu tzavcha atid litain et adin. This is the source that says that whoever named him as tzavcha is in the future having to give judgment, will be judged in the future because the Torah covered over it and didn't say his name, and yet this person revealed it. That was the story of Rabbi Akiva. I'll look at one other source about this Mikoshe scene, okay? This last source says that before I get to this last source number 8, I just want to say another piece about the Mikoshesh. So we're all struggling with what he did wrong, but according to that Midrash, it's not clear to Moshe what he did. I'm sorry, it's not clear to Moshe whether he did it intentionally or accidentally. It's all clear that he did something wrong. Now there is one opinion that says that the reason that the person that was Mikoshesh actually did it in order to sacrifice themselves for the future generations to know what not to do on Shabbat. Can you imagine? There's one opinion that says that this person knew what they were doing, and they did it on purpose for the sake of the Jewish people, because the Jewish people were not clear about what was wrong and what was right, and were they allowed to do that or not allowed to do it. This was not a clearly specified prohibition on Shabbat, and therefore this person actually sacrificed themselves for the sake of the future Jewish people. It's incredibly, almost like a martyrdom for the sake of clarification.
For the sake of clarification, just because I'm really confused.
Yeah.
This mystery man gathering wood, is he
Speak louder.
the wood gatherer? Is he a child of Israel? Is he an Israelite, or is he indigenous to the desert? And does that matter? And then, if these people are seeking and finding violators on the Sabbath, is that not itself work on the Sabbath?
Right.
So
These two things are really bothering me.
yeah. So according to the rabbis, and again, let me back up one or two steps behind Tomas and say, one, what really happens in the Torah is so hard. Like, what's going on here?
Sure.
I'm assuming that whoever edited this, and I'm assuming it's someone with divine inspiration, but not as my Orthodox upbringing and my other perspective. Like, it's a contiguous text that I think has intentionality, but I don't imagine it the way that the rabbis imagined it. In other words, the rabbis have a great leeway, and I give them like we were talking about this last night with Mark Schiller. Like, the rabbis were smelling things in the text that we don't often see. Midrash is built upon things that are in the text in some way, but then become expanded. And then the ways that the rabbis or that generation of building out what now is called Judaism, what they did was, hanging on something, but then they expanded, or things went in various directions. And our work is to try to discern what was motivating them, whether we agree with it or not, or what was inspiring them. And so the rabbis are reading this story in light of a really incredibly well-developed system of Jewish law around what Shabbat is and isn't. That is likely not that developed at the time that this is written. And so much of it is anachronistic. So it's kind of looking back and going, oh, but what is clear from the text is that something happened here that's not right. What's not clear from the text is who's the person, what exactly, when was this specific prohibition given in any clarity? We don't really have clarity around the specifics of what would it mean to violate Shabbat other than lighting a fire, right? It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah before this point that if you gather wood on Shabbat, it's prohibited. One can imagine that if you're gathering wood to kindle it, that the kindling, which has already been prohibited already in the book of Exodus, would be prohibited. So it's kind of, we're seeing this in real time. We're like, oh, we don't know either, just as they don't know. In other words, they know that something is quote unquote wrong here. Why do they know that something is wrong is also a question. Like, how did they know, right, that this was prohibited? Maybe they saw him doing something and they thought, oh, not a good idea, because you're probably going to light that on Shabbat. And they brought him in. But from a later generation of rabbis, it was already clear that to gather wood was already prohibited. And so they read that into the text. Now, why were people positioned, like, again, it's not prohibited to have guards on Shabbat to watch over for something. You're allowed to have a security guard or whatever it is. We have one here now. It's not the violation of Shabbat, but it's a weird, the whole story is weird. And why it's coming here between intentional sinning being, something that would remove you from the community, and why it's coming right before tzitzit is also unclear. And what it's doing in the entire warp and woof of this parsha, which is essentially begins with a bunch of a group that wants not to enter the land, it's all very strange. And especially when the stoning happens, and that's exactly what the Eidah wanted to do to Caleb and Joshua in the beginning of the story. Caleb and Joshua came back and spoke truth to the people against the mob, and the immediate response to them was, let's stone them to death. And the fact that this comes in a parsha where the people were so quick to judge, and they were going to stone this person to death, and here, even though the end is that there is a quote-unquote stoning, which we might say there's a public proclamation that this is not a good thing to do. Let's just take the stoning out of it for a second. Nobody's ever been stoned, as far as I know, recently, and in the last couple thousand years. We're pretty clear. We don't have examples of stoning. And thank God for the last 2,000 years, we didn't stone anybody who violated Shabbat, as far as I'm aware. But what usually we read from this story is that people, like, to violate Shabbat is wrong, and if it's done publicly, public people should be shamed, and public people should be, canceled. But I don't know that that's the moral of the story. I think the moral of the story is deeply contingent upon the fact that they waited and didn't know what to do. I think the moral of the story, more than God's giving them what to do, was the fact that they themselves as humans decided, you know what, we better ask for some advice on this because we're not clear. I think that's a more salient piece of this. We can get stuck on, well, I can't believe we stoned to death. Trust me, read through the whole Torah. There are plenty of things people die for that are also, in our moral categories, absurd and weird, and we're not on board with it. But we skip over this incredible moment, which I think is so vital. This word, which doesn't appear anywhere in the Torah in quite this way, where it says they put him they watched over, not knowing what to do. That to me is an incredible moment. Right? It says, Ki lo porash ma ya'asalo. And it doesn't say that Moses didn't know and Aaron didn't know, but it's like they skipped the moment where Moses and Aaron said, we don't know, and they just say, you know what? We have to wait. This is too important for us to make a decision on our own lights and in our own opinion, in our own desire. Like, there's something about Ki lo porash ma ya'asalo, which is so vital, I feel, in the story, especially if you understand it in the context of the ambiguity. Like, the ambiguity, is this accidental? Is this intentional? And they're like, you know what? How can we know how do we know if it's accidental to somebody? We don't know. And so the rabbis try to make it sure because of the punishment. The rabbis like, it must have been intentional. And really, what's going on? No, we don't know. And then the fact that the very next series of verses are reminding us about the tzitzit is completely about the spies. The tzitzit, the entire portion of the Torah that is the tzitzit, is connected to the spies because they were the ones that were led astray by their hearts and by their eyes. Right? There's an intertextual connection between the words, like it says that they go out latur to earth, they go out to reconnoiter the land, and then we say velo taturu. Don't reconnoiter. Don't let your heart, and meaning your confirmation bias, right? When it says your heart, it's your confirmation bias, your assumptions. Don't let your assumptions be the thing that leads you astray and judges the world unfavorably and sees the world as a place where you think you know. It's like, what? The tzitzit are there to remind us to wait a minute and to ask, as it were, ask God, ask for advice, ask for illumination, ask for inspiration. Kilo parashlam, we don't know. I'll get back to that in a second, but I want to stop because there's a lot of people, I'm sure, that have their hands up in the Zumagog who've been waiting patiently as we've been like schmoozing and figuring it out. So let's go to the Zumagog first, and then we'll go back to the room. Start with Jay, Amy, Daniel, and David, and let's keep it on the topic, everybody. Please stay on this topic and offer your insights. Go ahead, friends. Go ahead, Jay.
I can't unmute. Here we
can.
go. I wasn't able to unmute. You've anticipated a little bit while I've been waiting patiently, so let me draw a little bit on that question of ambiguity and tzitzit. I see something a bit disturbing to the modern, but you keep reminding us this is a Bronze Age text, because something very interesting happens in the second source, which is within 2 verses, there's the ambiguity, and then God tells Moshe what to do. And then in the next verse, everybody did as God had commanded Moshe. So to me, the tzitzit is simply saying, there's ambiguity. You don't know what to do. It's simple. Moshe is not going to be around forever, but I'm going to replace it with the tzitzit. And let that just be a reminder that you just follow my commandments. That's what you're to do. You're not to interpret. This is harsh, I know. You're not, but it's to me a valid reading. It's not up to you to interpret. You know you can't interpret, and you're not always going to have Moshe around, who's going to be my conduit. So now the fringes will remind you simply to follow my commandments.
Yeah, I think it's great that you said it in a very intense way, because we can soften it too, because we know that throughout Jewish history, everything has been about parshanut and interpretation, and we don't have an oracular capacity any longer. We don't have the Urim B'Tumim. We don't have this. Like, if this text is telling us go ask God for all whenever you're not sure about something, right? That's a tall order, but it is I think a profoundly important insight into the nature of human hubris. Like, I think that it doesn't tell us not to interpret, but like, be careful to know that you are, by definition, linguistically, language and brains are predisposed towards interpretive modes, and that's okay, as long as you also recognize that your interpretations are themselves, one of a series of possibilities and not the only truth. I think I think essentially that's the upshot of this crazy story of the 10 Raglim who came back and told the truth, but it was a partial truth, and we had 2 people who said, well, it's partially true. But where are you going to focus your energies? How will you interpret this moment? Like, there are multiple options. Which one will you choose? And that question is a grand question. Why am I always choosing the option that shows people or the world in a particular light? Like, do I have any choice on what narrative I spin? Is there any narrative flexibility? We're so predictable. Like, AI knows that now, and it's kind of like, it's a little bit scary. Like, where's the randomness, the capacity to step out of the story, and that's Caleb and Joshua. Like Caleb and Joshua, which we'll talk about a little bit during the service. But thanks, Jay, for that. So let's go to, really beautiful that you tied it in. Amy Daniel David. Amy Daniel David.
Okay. Oh, hi. Good morning, Shabbat Shalom. I just want to bring your attention to something that you just went through recently, which is the legislative process. And in the legislative process, you are first provided with the law, which is what happens in the verses. I'm taking a 100-foot view. So in the verses before the incident, they provide the law. In the discussion of the legislation that you just worked on, they provide examples of what is prohibited and what the penalty will be. And that's the story of the man gathering sticks. And then finally, if the law had passed, the law would be memorialized in the signing by the governor. And this is also the third step that's happening in this story, where you have the presentation of the law, the penalty, and the definition of what the law is, and then it's memorialized by the tzitzi, as similar to the reminding that the governor has approved, and the governor being God and Moses. So I just wanted to draw your attention to the parallel between what you just went through and this story.
Nice. Thank you. God's the governor. I like that. What's God's last name? Okay, great. Beautiful. Daniel. Well done, Amy. Thank you for bringing our attention. Go ahead, Daniel.
Shabbat Shalom. Just to reinforce some of the things that were said. First of all, let's not forget this is Bamidbar Medaber. So I think this whole series of incidents is about words and text and how people interpret. The fact in this particular passage, I think the fact that the man is not named and so on, leads me to interpret the whole thing sort of in the way that Amy is saying, like a prototypical example. It doesn't matter who the person was. What counts is he's qualified as what he did. So whoever does this way, it's a way to describe that. And then what you just said about we all bound to interpret things. And there, I just like to call the attention to the next parashat, Korach, which is another example of the same phenomenon of that. I think it's inevitable that we will necessarily interpret the text, right? And so this whole thing is saying, pay attention to that's what's going on, as you pointed out, and pay attention to the natural biases that we tend to ascribe. And so it's the tzitzit is just a reminder. It says, go to the Torah, look around or study and look at that. And the stoning is just to emphasize the gravity and the consequences of what we do. Ibati.
Shemati. So I think that that speaks for itself, Daniel. It's beautiful. Mamash Todah. He started with Midbar and then he went to Dibarti. So Shemanu. Rav David, 1 second, Nikki. Sorry. Go ahead, David.
Muting. Oh, here we are. Good Shabbos. I guess my question is, from the text that you're highlighting, can we discern that doubt and uncertainty are part of the warp and woof of emunah, of faith, or is doubt a loose thread? The Meraglim story seems to say that there's not a whole lot of room for doubt. Tzitzit seems to remind us, Tzitzit tells us that God understands that doubt is part of of the structure of faith, and we need reminders. And this story seems to reinforce that. But there's this tension. What is the role of doubt? The people here say, we have doubts. Famous line from the movie Doubt. And I'm wondering if you think that's too much of a leap to look at this theologically.
No, David, I think that's the point I think that I'm trying to make, is that I think that the text is, like all text is, as Derrida came along to say in the Western vernacular, but we Jews knew, he took it from, as a Jew, he knew it from the Jewish tradition, that words and signifiers are sliding in their contextual located, they're located, but they're also located within vast, context of meaning that dislodge them from any kind of situated forgiven. And so I think that the spy story is exactly a story of doubt, and it's not doubt. It's not a punishment for having doubt. The punishment is for allowing doubt to become its own certainty, and not in its fluid state. And to know that doubt and action of course, they're so intimately connected. And people can have absolute radical doubt, and should. In fact, if anything, the Torah and the Chazal are all about unmooring fixed notions of God, fixed notions of what the holy is. All the fixities of the Torah are become fluid in the minds of the rabbis. But at the same time, like the story of the Meraglim is a story about that in a world of doubt, action also matters. And maybe more so, because doubt can corrode and our capacity to act with clarity. And so God in the Torah is saying, I gave you a clear promise. In other words, I represent the greatest possible, life insurance policy you can imagine. And yet you still have doubt. So the Torah says, okay, you have doubt because you saw that they were big people and so on. And that's exactly what Caleb and Joshua said. We agreed they're big people, but so what? Like, we have to go forward. Like, we don't have a choice. Like, the choose not to go forward is also a choice. And so it's not convicting those who have doubt. It's convicting those in a very profound way of those who are paralyzed by that doubt. And it wants to find a way to assure people. Like, I was watching a YouTube video this week from when my kids they were the skateboarding. So this great video of this really, really young girl on an edge of a half pike, I think it is, or something like it has like a slope that was almost 90 degrees. It was unbelievably scary. I was scared watching the video. I was like, I had to pause it because I was like, oh my God, I can. Little girl, she's standing on the edge of it, and it's terrifying. It's clear that this is a big deal. And this famous skateboarder named Tony Hawk, he's like a famous skateboarding guy, and he's somewhere. You can't see him, but you can hear him going, "You got this, you got this." And it takes her like a good 4 minutes. She keeps going, I'm gonna go. And she starts to wring her hands. She's like, I can't. Like you can hear, she's like, I can't. And then you keep hearing going, you can do it. And then finally, she just like something, she centered herself, and she put her second foot onto the top of the board, and she went. And I was watching it, and she didn't make it. She made it all the way to the bottom, and then she bailed out. She got on a tush and she slid. But then they started doing it the second time, and he yells, "You can do it." She does it again and again. Third time, she's like flying, and she's like. It was mamish, like that's the story of the Miraglim. Like they're on the edge, they're terrified, they're holding, and instead of everybody saying you can do it, and we get it, like they get scared. But the Torah is not a story of those who get scared and go backwards, but a story of those who are scared and they keep going. And I think that, again, we might not like its message, but I think that it's certainly a message about doubt and certainty. And the Tzitziot are talking to that too. Okay, I think we have some people in the room. Thanks for David. A couple of people, and then I have one last source. So we'll go to, I think it was Wendy, and Nikki, you don't have your hand up, but I don't know, do you want to speak?
Yes.
Elliot, Nikki. Okay, we'll go around. And let's be brief. Yeah.
Okay. I think going forward, the Chachamim in the Talmud really were kinder and gentler to this situation, in that when they analyze it, they would also say that the person had to be warned.
Right.
That the people that found him would have had to say, "Don't you know today is Shabbat?"
Right.
And so he would have had to say, "Yes, I know today is Shabbat, right, and I don't care, and I'm gathering sticks anyway." Or he could have had some other reason that would have validated him to gather the sticks.
Absolutely.
Like if it
so the rabbis themselves are providing a kind of buffer against the harshness of the text and the
right,
decree.
and such that the Chachamim in the Talmud are much less harsh, and then going forward, the reason in the Sanhedrin they only
I'll talk about that in the last source. Yeah, I'll talk about
less
this.
than one, and then also in terms of just the philosophy in general of the Talmud in regards to the spy is to examine every situation from the top, from the bottom, from
and try
the
to
front,
be as comprehensive
from the back,
as possible.
from the right and the left, and the spies didn't do that.
Well said. We're going to get back to that in 3 or 4 minutes. Elliot.
Yeah, so one thing that's interesting to me is that in the first section, verses 27 to 32, there are two punishments that are specified. Okay, one is the offering, and the other is being cut off from the people. In this case, okay, the punishment is being stoned to death,
right,
which you correct me if I'm wrong, is worse than being cut off from the people.
It's not clear. It's clear from the rabbinic sources that they're different. It's not clear from the text if they're quote unquote different. If karet is in fact being killed or not. We're not. The simple meaning of the text though is unclear. But at least in Jewish history, those are completely distinct things. So it leads one to believe that maybe what's going on here is not either one of those two things that preceded it. Yeah.
Okay. Right. And so the distinction here in the first portion is between an unwitting sin and a defiant sin.
Right.
Right. And so one way to look at this, I think, is when we get to the tzitzit, is don't be stupid. Pay attention, okay, to the commandments. So that you're not committing unwitting sins.
Yes.
That you are aware, okay, that there are certain things, and I'm not saying literally, but that when we think about our own, to be aware, okay, of knowing what the difference between right and wrong.
Yes.
Don't be, be aware. Obey the command, whatever those commandments mean to you, in terms whether it's the literal, 10 commandments or your moral code. Pay attention, okay, and learn, okay, what the difference between right and wrong.
Yeah, I think it's a very, maybe it's not such it resonates for me what you're saying, and maybe it's not the most popular thing to say at this moment, but I think if we were to abstract some of what's happening here and just apply it across the board in any given culture, society, group that we're living in, like not knowing a law is not an excuse. I got a ticket in Pennsylvania for not knowing that I was supposed to be, like, a cop had stopped on the side of the road and was talking to someone, and I stayed in the right lane. And she pulled me over afterwards. I was with one of my kids, and she said, you know, if there's a law, I think it's a law everywhere, but I didn't even know the law. Like, you have to, if you see someone on the shoulder of the road who's a police officer, just, you know, you have to move over. And I didn't know. And so she looked at me, she was very kind, and she said, I'm sorry, but like, that's the law, and you'll remember from now on. I said, you're absolutely right. I'll never forget, you know, and I think there's something about the Torah telling us that if you want to be a member of this community and its norms, then you have to participate in its norms. And if you stand outside of those norms for whatever reason, like, there's a good reason for us to, you know, to tell you, like, hey, wake up, you have to come back inside. Now, you know, if we have to be slightly abstract to kind of avoid some of we get caught on the, you know, the capital punishment piece, which is Wendy said never really happened, but it's a very intense reminder in the Torah's language of, know the group that you belong to and its norms and standards and abide by them. Okay, Nikki, go ahead, voice your concern.
You're not gonna like this. I simply.
Trust me, I've heard it all, so go ahead.
I cannot get past the stoning. I'm reminded of Jesus, let him who was not guilty cast the first
He had
stone.
lashes.
And this is the kind of stuff that gives Judaism a bad name. You know, how do you digest that stoning? I mean, how?
Well, I want to say, I know that we only have about 11 minutes, and I want to quickly address this because I think it's like, not only have I heard it all, but I thought it all. So let me just explain. It doesn't give Judaism a bad name in the sense that, like, it only gives Judaism a bad name if we look at texts that are written at this period across the board, and Judaism is uniquely barbaric as opposed to other texts from the Hittites or the Chaldeans or the Kodo Hammurabi or the Egyptians and so on. Like, again, Game of Thrones has nothing over on early Bronze Age texts. And what's brilliant about the Torah is not that it has moments like this. What's brilliant about the Torah is that moments like this are mixed together with moments like the tzitzit that come, or the fact that if somebody does something accidentally, they're not punished actually, they just bring a little lamb. Now you might have a problem with them bringing a little lamb, okay fine, or a little goat, but as far as I'm concerned, the Torah is working within a worldview that is anathema and foreign to us in so many ways. And so, but thankfully, the Torah also the rabbis took the Torah and they brought it through a paradigm shift. In every generation, we understood the Torah differently and applied its wisdom. There's no doubt that Shabbat would not rise up to the level of capital punishment for us. But espionage in our country might. If somebody were to give away the secrets of our country and that endanger, like, I'm not a big fan of capital punishment bichlal. I don't think it's a deterrent. I don't think it's actually, I'm not a retributive justice person. I'm a restorative justice person for the most part. So I don't know how killing one person enacts any kind of, so I'm not on board with capital punishment in general. I think that I read the story like I read all the stories about Dinah or about the Akedah in chapter 22 of the book of Genesis as part of our people's complicated, nuanced, incredibly progressive, yet situated inheritance of wisdom, and I try to participate in trying to understand it on my terms in a way that also honors its own origins, and I don't shy away from what makes it ugly, because I think that the ugly parts of our tradition are also part of the story that we tell, and we are in danger when we excise. We had an amazing woman in our community named Helene Ayalon, and Helene Ayalon was who passed away during the pandemic, was a radical feminist installation artist who also was a radically amazing human being, Aquarian in every which way. She was completely cut across in every which way of the grain, and she did a famous installation where she took all the patriarchal pieces of the Torah and she highlighted in yellow, and she had an installation where you walked around and saw like various pieces of abuse and misogyny and so racism and I think it was an important piece. I would have had it up here at Romemu in a heartbeat. I think they had an installation in another synagogue. It's great. But the next day we wake up in the morning, we say, if we start cutting and pasting everything, we'll have nothing left. So we have to keep them there and continue to wrestle with them. And you're wrestling. So thank you, Nikki. I'm gonna move it. Yeah. Marcelo.
Yeah. Briefly,
Sorry.
just a note, it's not a thought, just a note, how the text, the dichotomy between human being, Lamed Dalet, Pasuk Lamed Dalet, and Pasuk Lamed Hey. On the earth, Kilo Porash Maya Aselo, that's on the earth, but right away,
In
It
heaven,
says, in heaven, it's clear.
right,
And it's black and white in heaven.
right,
It's black and white.
right.
So, and it's that,
I'm coming back to this, coming back to Wendy. I can't, I only have one more comment, then I have to finish with the text. I'm sorry. Yeah.
So what interests me on Tosei particularly is just the issue of intentionality
Yes.
that you were bringing up.
Yes,
Because of course on some level, we can never know.
right,
Not even can we not know in somebody else's part, but I think what's fascinating is in some level, we understand today how much we don't know even in our own
in our own
hearts.
hearts.
Because of the literature and trauma that so many people study here.
Right.
And we are traumatized people, as we know, that so much of trauma means like we've been developmentally sort of stuck, that until we can move through that, there's only, with our free will itself has some limits. It's something I'm particularly interested in studying and writing about right now. So it's so interesting to me, this passage that brings up that space.
Yeah.
Since we cannot know, could there ever be that kind of sin? And in the Talmud, as I understand it, there is a passage that prohibits the death penalty, right? There's this whole sort of piece about how, rabbis go to such length to make sure that's not possible, even if it's in the law, like there are all these different ways.
Yeah, let's look at this for a second. We're gonna let's finish with this.
Okay,
I'm sorry
that creates a lot of space.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but I have limits too, because I have to go upstairs. So beautifully said, and let's come to this last source, which will underscore, this last source underscores, what Wendy and I think a lot of people have been saying, but it's something that I Kilo Parash, it wasn't clear to them. In the beginning of the parsha, it was clear to the people of Israel that the Meraglim, the 10 spies, were correct, and they didn't wait to hear from God. They didn't wait to hear from Moses. They immediately jumped to a conclusion, and they were willing to run the other direction. And here, I want to hold out the possibility that the text, in a very mysterious way, not in the most obvious way, in a concealed way, but also, I think, in an important way, says that they learned their lesson and they were willing to wait. Because judgment belongs to God, not to us. And so in the source, on Tisha B'Av, this is a famous story from the Rebbe of Berdichev. On Tisha B'Av, the Rebbe of Berdichev came across an obviously non-observant Jew who was eating in the town of Berdichev. My child, the Rebbe said, you must certainly have forgotten that today is Tisha B'Av, a fast day. No, I did not forget, the man replied. I noticed Tisha B'Av, continuing to eat. Then you certainly have not been feeling well, and you're under doctor's orders not to fast today, the Rebbe said. I am perfectly healthy, the man said. I have nothing to do with doctors. The Berditcher lifted his face toward heaven. Look, Rabbanu Shel Olam, how truthful and honest your children are. I offer the man opportunities to explain his behavior, but he insists on telling the truth, even to his own hurt. He knows how much you value the truth, and he will not divert from it. Who else would be so loyal to your principles? Right? And it says in the parsha that always falls before Shabbos, before Tisha B'Av, in Devarim 1:17 and Deuteronomy 1:17, that a judge is not to favor a greater person more than a lesser person. The judge must listen to them equally. Ki hamishpat le'elokimhu, which means for judgment belongs to God alone. So Rav Soloveitchik, the great Rav Soloveitchik, said that if one looks at the technicalities involved in the Jewish court system, they will see that it is almost impossible to ever impose the death penalty. For example, a person has to be warned that what they're about to do is punishable by death within a few seconds of doing it, toch kedei dibur. If the person waits 5 seconds after being warned and then does it, then they can't be killed. We have many statements in the Gemara to this effect. A court that kills once in every 70 years is called a bloody court. Right. Rabbi Akiva said that if we're up to him, no one would ever be killed, because judgment is God's and not man's. The only reason human being judges, is to keep the world in order. And that in Pirkei Avos, it says, do not judge alone, because none judge alone except for Echad. The commentators explain it means that no one can judge alone except for God. And so in the end of the day, my brother and I were really struggling. I spent this week, and I want to give credit to my brother, Tzemach Adam and Shachna and Velka Miriam. My brother Adam Ingber and I were discussing this at length. And we were really struggling with what the meaning of the Mikoshesh Eitzim is, the story of the gather of wood. And I want to say that in Kabbalistic sources and Chassidus, the word Eitzim is very significant, because the word Eitz means tree. And to be Mikoshesh Eitzim is to gather the trees, they say, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of life, and to bring them together. And they say that nobody really knows the mystery of how to bring those two things together. The world of choice, which is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, knowing what's right and what's wrong exactly, precisely. And the tree of life, which is the life, is immortality and wisdom and divinity. And so the question for us on the table, of course, on the Shabbos is again, can we wait long enough between witnessing something with our eyes and interpreting it with our heart, knowing that really, even after, when we saw it for the first time, we were also seeing it through the lens of our confirmation bias. And that objectivity, to some extent, we don't have a world in which we are allowed to escape making judgments. We have to make judgments. But can we wait long enough to make, to have some space around our proclivity towards a particular way of looking at a person, at a situation, or at the future in particular, like what the future holds? So I think it's a good question to hold, and the wood gatherer kind of locates those questions. And the fact that the tzitziot are connected to the miraglim, to the spies, reminds us that in some way, shape, or form, it isn't a one-done deal. It's a practice of reminding ourselves every single day. Don't be led astray by your confirmation biases that then impact the way you look at the world. Try your best to stay open, if you can, right? And to watch what arises first in the heart and mind, and then look at the world change in front of your eyes. We often think we don't have a filter on when we look at the world, but we filter the world through the filters that we already in this moment have. Teachers, rabbis, Bibles, human beings, like it's a hard one. But Kilo Parash, each and every one of us is a commentator. So what will be your commentary today? Maybe decide first before you actually go and view the world what you are going to see, and then see if you see it.
Compassion before judgment.
Compassion before judgment. All right, friends. With those last words, we're gonna close the Zoom. We'll go upstairs and daven. Shabbos to everybody. I'll see you guys in a month. I'll be in Eretz Yisrael. I'll bring back some holy air for all of you. Shabbos.
Rabbi, good Shabbos.
Hi everybody, Shabbat Shalom. I think you can all unmute, you can all
Shabbat Shalom.
and let me clear off all the other security so you can schmooze and talk as you will.
Shabbat Shalom.
That was powerful Torah.
Wow.
Chaim Yassel.